You're listening to the B&H Photography Podcast. For over 40 years, B&H has been the professional source for photography, video, audio, and more. For your favorite gear, news, and reviews, visit us at bnh.com or download the B&H app to your iPhone or Android device. Now here's your host, Alan Weitz.
Greetings and welcome to the B&H Photography Podcast. Under starry skies, we return this year to Brooklyn Bridge Park and Photoville 2018. Photoville is a 2-week photography festival that features a plethora of gallery shows and exhibitors, most of them situated in repurposed shipping containers. Admission is absolutely free, though donations are greatly appreciated. Once you enter, you can listen in on lectures, watch videos, or learn about taking tintype portraits from the nice folks over at the Penumbra Foundation. There's also a food and beer garden, and photographs are everywhere. But a majority of the exhibitions are housed in shipping containers, and like last year, we wandered about the event speaking with photographers, editors, and exhibit curators. First up, we're going to speak with Michael Lorenzini of the New York City Municipal Archives, who along with Matthew Miner organized a show from the archive of the WPA Federal Writers Project. We spoke with Michael about this impressive collection and his thoughts about the mission of the Municipal Archive, which he's been part of for over 2 decades. We stay in the New York groove as we speak with teachers and students from 2 New York City high schools, the High School of Fashion Industries and my alma mater, the High School of Art and Design. We had a chance to talk about their long-standing photography programs and their current exhibit, Telling a Story and Selling an Idea. From there, we head over to an exhibit, Consecuencias/Consequences, which was organized by photographers from Chiapas, Mexico. After a short break, we're going to return with Ron Haviv and Dr. Lauren Walsh of the Seven Foundation exhibit. The focus of our chat is their upcoming film, Biography of a Photo, which traces the impact of 2 photographs Ron Haviv took early in his career, which have left indelible marks on the countries in which they were taken, not to mention pretty much everybody who's viewed these photographs. Our next stop is the container curated by the Authority Collective and their exhibit, The Lit List, 30 under-the-radar photographers. Here we're going to speak with members of the collective and photographer Arlene Mejarado, whose work is included. And we wrap up this visit to Photoville 2018 by speaking with curator Krista Dix from the Los Angeles-based gallery Wall Space Creative about their exhibit Internal Ballistics. Let's start with Michael Lorenzini from the New York City Municipal Archives. With Michael Lorenzini with the WPA Archive. We got some amazing black and white photographs that go back decades, specifically from the WPA, which is the 1930s. Is that correct?
Yeah, the WPA was part of the Roosevelt New Deal, Depression-era ways of battling unemployment. They had a number of different projects, and one of the largest ones that involved the arts was the WPA Federal Writers Project.
Now, you said writers, not photographers.
Right. So there was the Federal Art Project, and there was the Federal Writers Project, and there was Federal Music and Theater and all these things. But the Federal Writers Project had units in all states, which were 48 states at the time, and they had a New York City unit, which was the largest of the units. And they collected photographs from the Federal Art Project, and they also had their own staff photographers that they sent out to document.
And a lot of those photographs are ones that a lot of people are familiar with. There's some notable photographers. You want to rattle off a few names?
Well, in this exhibit, the names that people are going to recognize are Dorothea Lange and Berenice Abbott, and we do have a number of Berenice Abbott prints in the collection and a couple of Dorothea Lange's. But I think what's interesting about the show is a lot of the other photographs are by either we don't know who took them or they're by photographers that the general public hasn't heard of before.
How many photographers were there altogether?
We have never been able to compile a complete list of all the photographers because, like I said, some of them are not listed. In the New York City unit, though, I think we've been able to identify at least 24 photographers in that collection. But then they also collected, like I said, photographs from the Federal Art Project and from commercial photographers.
I think what's interesting is that a lot of these photographs, if you look at them, they're almost snapshots, and they're kind of, you'd even say, mundane in many, many ways. They're ordinary. Yet when you look at them, they are a record of things and people and places that don't exist anymore. And they say an awful lot. You look at one photograph, you're seeing architecture, you're seeing the way people are dressed, you're seeing automobiles, you're seeing occupations that don't even exist anymore. You don't see too many push carts, for instance.
No. So the inspiration for this show was a 1980 show that was done. It was edited by Barbara Milstein, who was the curator at the Brooklyn Museum for many years. And the original show was 120 images, and it was really just sort of like a grab bag of different types of styles and photographers. And when we decided to relook at this and decided maybe it needed a new edit, I mean, one of the things we really wanted to focus on is just WPA photographers, with no commercial photographers, just photographers who are working for the WPA. But also, we started to whittle down to a certain aesthetic, and what we're really drawn to is this sort of street photography, straight documentary aesthetic, because it was so much more truthful and gave you much more of an impression of walking out into 1930s New York City.
And also, these were taken at a time when photography was rather unique. These days, I mean, everybody's a photographer. Everyone's taking pictures. But a lot of these photographs here, especially where people are aware of the camera, having a picture taken was more of an event at that point, I think, for some of these people. And some of these people might be the only first time they might have actually been photographed.
Could be. It's possible. Yeah, certainly. If you were a fish peddler or a pushcart vendor or something like that, it probably was not something people were normally taking photographs of. Yeah. I mean, there's, the person who's probably the most famous person in this show is Charlie Wagner, who was a famous tattoo artist on the Bowery. So he may have had his photograph taken before, but honestly, I've not seen that many photographs even of him, and I know people who've done research.
Can you talk a little bit about the Municipal Archives, maybe the history of it a bit, the size of it, the scope of it, some of the interesting collections you have?
Well, the New York City Municipal Archives is the archive of the city government of New York City, established in the 1950s, and our collections go back to the 1600s, though, to the Dutch colonial era. We have photographic collections dating back to the mid-1800s, but really the bulk of our collections start around 1900, which is when the city really started using photography to document projects that they were involved in. So 99% of our photographs come from city-employed photographers who are working for different city agencies. The WPA is one of our few exceptions where we accession this from a federal agency, but they
buy collections, or is it all by donation of work?
Yeah, no, we have no acquisition budget. And our collecting policy is really just to collect the records created by government workers.
There's a show here now from the summer of 1978 by New York Times photographers when there was a newspaper strike.
Yes.
They went to work for the Parks Department, correct?
Right.
So theoretically, those photos.
Those photographs should be in our archive. And they will be someday.
Talk a little bit about your conservation and storage techniques, and most of these, I assume, are from original film.
Yeah.
What we call medium format film now.
Right. Well, in this. There was a number of different formats of film that the WPA photographers use. So we have in this show things that are originally on 8x10 negatives to 35 millimeter negatives, and everything in between. The original negatives have been in frozen storage for many years.
Where is the location? Where do you store them?
Well, our office is at 31 Chambers Street. It's the Surrogates Court building, and that's where those particular negatives are stored. But we also have a warehouse in Brooklyn at Industry City, where we have a little freezer farm of negative storage. But we're in the process of building out a new climate-controlled warehouse space out at Industry City with a big walk-in freezer box, which is my dream come true.
So photos are still being added to this?
To the collection? Yeah. When I've been there for 21 years, and when I started, we used to say we had 1 million photographs. We took in some other huge film collections, and now we have about 5 million photographs.
And are there any photos, let's say what we might call famous photos or iconic photos, that are housed and owned by the Municipal Archives? Something that a regular person would just recognize?
Well, I mean, the most iconic has got to be the Eugene de Salignac photograph of the workers, the painters on the Brooklyn Bridge cables, which... so he was totally unknown until 1999, which is actually when I discovered that collection in the archives and did the research that brought him to light, and I did a book in 2007 on him. But that photograph had been known, it had been published, but no, again, he was just an anonymous city photographer. I had come from a photo editing background at Aperture, and when I was looking at that collection, I realized this isn't a collection, this is a body of work. This is all one eye, one photographer, 30 years, and that was... Haven't made a discovery quite like that since then, but that was a good one. But yeah, I mean, and there are other iconic images in the WPA collection for sure.
Any one or two collections that really stand out as just gems?
Well, that collection is the Department of Bridges Plant and Structures collection, which is the same agency. They changed their name from the Department of Bridges to the Department of Plant and Structures at some point, but and that's 20,000 glass plate negatives and 10,000 vintage prints, and that's really a superb collection. This is about 5,000 images total, the WPA collection, and again, another standout. But we have a lot of other ones. Borough President Brooklyn. Right now we're digitizing the Borough President Queens collection, which is from the, I think it starts in the late 20s and goes through the 40s, and it's, again, amazing collection of photographs.
Probably have a ton of pictures from the World's Fair from back in '64, I would imagine.
We only, the World's Fairs were not quite done as city projects. We have this one collection that was done by a photographer who was a retired news photographer, and his daughter donated that collection to us. But other than that, we don't have a lot of city stuff. There's a fair amount of 30s World's Fair because Mayor LaGuardia was heavily involved in it.
Any gaps? Any major
gaps? Like to see. It's one of those things. Like right now, we don't have very much control over what agencies are going out and photographing. And when I hear about the different things going on in the city or different projects, I just keep thinking, I hope some good photographer's taking photographs of that. But I really have no control over whether that's happening.
What percentage of the pictures that you've seen really stand out to you, saying these are exceptional photographs? Because a lot of them are just pictures.
Yeah, a lot of the right, absolutely. With a lot of those municipal collections, a lot of them it's just like somebody had to go out and shoot a photograph of this to document it. And it's just straightforward. Technically may be good, but
every once in a while you see a picture that makes you stop and go, ooh. Yeah. How often does that happen?
The exhibit we did last year was on the HPD photographers, Housing Preservation Development, and they had 3 really good photographers who worked for them over the years. One was Larry Rasiopo, who's sort of well-known in New York photography circles, but there was another photographer, Paul Rice, and Leonard Boykin, who I was really surprised. I was looking at these photographs, and I was like this is like a Lee Freelander. Where did this guy come from? And why was he working for the city agency?
It's called the paycheck.
Exactly. Yeah. And health benefits. That's why I work for a city agency.
Is the NYPD forensic stuff in your?
Yeah. So in 2011, I helped take in the NYPD Manhattan Photography Unit collection, which went from 1898 to about 1980.
Ooh, wow.
That's got to be a good
It's like 140,000 images. So
it's going to take a while to go through.
Yeah, well, we've just finished processing it all, and we digitized around 30,000 images, but we haven't put them all online yet. But that's another amazing collection. I hope that's going to be my next book project.
What percentage of your of the photographs you have been digitized? Because that's a major undertaking on its own.
Well, we're about to complete a real long-term dream of ours, which is to digitize the 1940s tax photographs, which was another WPA-sponsored project, which was they went around and photographed every single building in 1939 through 1941, using Leicas and 35 millimeter film in the 5 boroughs. So it's over 700,000 images. And we went back to the original nitrate film and all the images have now been digitized. They're still doing QC and processing on them, and we hope by the end of the year that's going to go online, and that's going to be pretty amazing. And that will put what we have digitized online close to 2 million images.
So all these images are easy to access online by anybody?
Yeah, oh yeah, we have archives.nyc, or you can go to nyc.gov/records, and that'll direct you to our gallery.
We are at Photoville 2018, and we are with students from the High School of Art and Design and the High School of Fashion Industries. And a little P.S., I'm a past graduate of the High School of Art and Design many decades ago. The focus of this show is telling a story and selling an idea, and it features students from the High School of Art and Design and the High School of Fashion Industries. And there's some amazing, wonderful black and white pictures here. Speaking with Ben Russell and Brenna McLaughlin, with several students to talk about this show. First, Ben, tell us a little bit about this exhibit, how it came to be, and the background to it.
Okay, so Brenna and I are both high school teachers. We teach photography, and we got together and decided to collaborate on an exhibition and show our students' work from two different perspectives. Her students' work is digital color work, and it's the idea of selling an idea. So our schools are CTE schools, career and technical education schools. Right. So we're teaching our students photography and art, but we're also teaching them job skills, things that they could use in a career. So her work is focused on assignments, fashion assignments, commercial editorial assignments, and then my students' work is focused more on documentary work, classic kind of photojournalism work. And then the other difference is her work is digital, and the work from my students is black and white film photography. So my school, we're very privileged. We're one of only a few schools, public schools left in New York City, where we have an actual working darkroom. And the students are given Pentax K1000s and as much film as they want, and we teach them how to shoot and process film and make prints in the darkroom.
Now, do they complain about having to shoot film? That's old-fashioned, no?
Well, why don't you ask them? Ask one of them.
I'm saying that in all jest because honestly, I think if you could learn how to shoot film, you could shoot anything, and that's the beauty of it. You learn control and everything else. It's more than point and shoot. That's really, really great.
They do complain about it though, because it's messy. There's chemicals, smell, and they get on your hands and your clothes, and it's tedious. It's difficult and it's slow. But what I found as a teacher is that the process and the tedium and the difficulty and everything results in the kids being more invested in the results.
That's absolutely true.
Can you talk a little bit about how you set up the production side of making these shows?
We're very lucky to have a full commercial studio. So half of it is a digital lab, half of it is a commercial studio, and the students utilize their work-based learning skills and have jobs and facilitate photo shoots where they partner with the other majors. We have 7 other majors at our school besides photography, and some of the work that's being exhibited is collaborations between fashion students at Art and Design and photography students at Art and Design. So
and the students get a chance to go to a professional commercial studio and assist and take a look at that anyway.
Our work-based learning internship program allows students to, it's an application process. It's a little more individualized as opposed to an entire class, but they go through an application process, and we have professional photographers we partner with, so they can see both.
I think the collaborative issue, I think that's really important. We didn't have that back in the day. We had photographers, and there was no interaction with the other departments. And I think if you're going into commercial work, that's really important because you don't work alone. If you're going out commercially, you are working with other people, and you have to learn to collaborate. No two ways about it.
We're in a moment in public education where we're moving towards group-based and project-based learning, and people are looking at art teachers to see what that looks like, because it's just so natural for project-based learning to happen in the art room because so many subjects attach to it. So you can see the connections that are made between each subject area.
Your name is?
Erica Perez.
Erica. So what's your background? Did you enter art and design knowing that you wanted to be in photography, or did you also come in with a different interest and after the first year of going around to all the specialties chose photography?
I came into the school wanting to go to cartooning, but after I did a photography project during my art history class and my design foundation, I fell in love with photography because I love the use of composition, color, and then the editing techniques as well.
Okay, and what grade are you in now?
I am in my senior year.
You're also a senior, and what do you want to do when you get out? What's your goal? What direction do you want to go in?
I'm interested in being a commercial photographer, like freelance.
Any specific type of photography?
I think like maybe forensic photography would be interesting.
Okay, all right. We've actually had forensic photographers on our show before. It's an interesting profession. That's good stuff. Your name is?
Jacqueline Garcia Hernandez.
Ah, okay. And
I go to fashion industries.
Okay.
And so for my artwork, being someone who has families who are immigrants, I wanted to speak on that and show and demonstrate the struggles of that.
Well understood.
Yeah.
So did you go into school intending to be a photographer, or did you also have a different interest before you got into school?
Actually, my interest was to go into fashion industries as an artist, like physically in drawing traditionally. So when they gave me black and white film photography, I was kind of frustrated because I didn't want to focus on that.
Yeah.
But the way Mr. Russell said that, oh, this is the once in a lifetime, you're never going to get a chance to actually do this. Like, who else is going to be having a dark room in their room or somewhere else for you to do it? So I'm like, you know what, let me open up my mind to this and take a chance. And so even till now, I'm doing digital photography. I'm actually getting more into photography. So
Are you still keeping up your fine art?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
You can blend the two.
Yeah, I am. I'm thinking of for some of the projects, I'm going to add like some traditional drawings onto like actual film photography. So, yeah.
I'm Thais Rivera, and the school that I go to is Art and Design High School.
Okay, so you're a senior also?
I'm a junior.
You're a junior?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. I have to find, did you enter art and design thinking you were going to be a photographer, or did you also come with a different specialty?
I thought I was going to go into cartooning or architecture, but then when we were in freshman year, when we were doing our design foundation course, we would, take in the courses of every major that was in the school, and once we did the photography project, I was like, oh my, I sort of like this.
Ding.
Maybe I could do this. Ding,
yeah.
A bell ringed in my head, and I was like, that's what I want to do. I want to pursue in that.
That's great. That's wonderful.
Last question. So the photo that we're looking at here is kind of a light spiral, I'll call it, light painting maybe. What was the task that was presented to you?
So Ms. McLaughlin was teaching us was to study the emphasis of motion. And so what I decided to do was use light painting as a way to describe motion. So.
And how many takes did you get the shot?
One.
No way.
Yeah. My dad was helping me hold down the shutter open, so it would time the spiral that the lights were going in.
What kind of light is it?
I just decided, because a light stick is very expensive nowadays, and I decided to get a wooden stick and some fairy lights from Michael's, and I taped it all together, and then I just spun it in a circle.
A lot of creativity. All right, beautiful. What cameras are you guys using?
We're using Canon Rebels.
Canon Rebels?
Yeah.
Anybody else? Okay. We're speaking with Simona Islam. Hi, nice to meet you. So tell us about your work.
My pictures are mostly based on family. So the first one, I have my sister, and the other one, I have my grandmother. This one is one of my favorite that I've done because it represents my culture. My sister, she was getting ready for a modeling job, and she was representing our culture, which is Bangladesh. She was wearing traditional jewelry, and I just thought I'd like to capture the moment.
That's great. Did you enter school thinking about photography? Was that your goal, or did you also have a different specialty before you?
No, I didn't have any specific different specialties. I knew that I wanted to do something that made me feel good, and that was sending a message out to the world. And I wanted to get into journalism. And so when I got into photography, I was looking more into photojournalism, and that's what I'm heading towards currently.
All right, well, you got a good start here. You got a very good eye. Nice compositions and all that, too. It's very good. Nice.
Thanks, guys. Thank you so much.
Okay, we are in another container. This one has a new theme. It's called Consequences. And we're with Pablo Farias and Isaac Guzman. And nice to have you guys. There's some amazingly strong black and white imagery here. Can you gentlemen tell us about what we're looking at here?
Sure, absolutely. So Consecuencias is an exhibit about the history of photography in Chiapas in the south of Mexico and how it connects the traditional film and silver gelatin printing work that historically has been so important in Mexico going back decades, to the more current digitally based photography used for creating stories about community events and building memory and a capacity for connecting people to the events in their surroundings. So photographers in Mexico have taken on this tradition of many years of work in photography and adopted it to make it part of their storytelling and creation of visual narratives. And what we wanted was to show how significant this connection is in Chiapas, which is the lowest income state in Mexico, a mostly indigenous state, very much in the history of the Mayan people in Mexico, and one that has had a long trajectory of traveler photography. So, going back to the 1840s, not with photography, but with the illustrations that Stephens and Catherwood did of the Mayan ruins that were here in Madison Square Garden in the late 1840s, when people would go into these large-scale dioramas to visit the world before international traveling happened, to the photos of Morley in the 1880s that were all in glass negative, large format cameras, and so many photographers of the 20th century that, as travelers, photographed the indigenous lives, the culture, the very dramatic imagery of the tropical areas and the Mayan culture of Mexico. But building from that, we wanted to show how much people have adopted photography and have really created a culture of photography that is rooted in community, and that with digital photography now it becomes so much more accessible. And so people like Maruch Santis are an indigenous woman from a Tzotzil Maya community in Chiapas, is using photography to explore the changes in the traditions and culture of her Tzotzil indigenous community. Trágame Luz, which is a collective of photographers, and Isaac can speak more to that because he's part of Trágame Luz, is using photography to create a collective sense of how social change is developing in Mexico. And of course, José Ángel Rodríguez, who was for many years an assistant and a student of Manuel Álvarez Bravo, the best-known, iconic Mexican photographer, and continues to print the work of Álvarez Bravo in Mexico, working for his archive, brings the learning that he developed working with Álvarez Bravo and other Mexican photographers to Chiapas, to a new generation of photographers.
How, when was this collection brought together initially? You said it goes back over 100 years, a lot of these images.
Well, these images go back to the 1980s.
Okay. And there are how many photographers represented here today?
About 10 if one counts the Trágame Luz collective. So it's 2 photographers, the portfolios of them. José Ángel Rodríguez, the black and white silver gelatin prints, Maruch Santis with her prints of traditional knowledge and culture, and then the Trágame Luz collective, which is 8 photographers out of a collective group that is more contemporary.
And Trágame Luz is a collective of photographers from Chiapas working to kind of represent their own community. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, one of the main reasons that the collective began is to share photography in public spaces. The proposal was 17 years ago to take the photographs to the streets besides galleries. So that's how began the collective.
And who started it? Was it yourself or a group of people?
No, I'm fairly new in the collective. I have 5 years now, but there are friends that they started it. One of the things that we have is that the collective is really open, and one of the main compromise that we have is to do pictures with the people, not just of the people. And that's how we work. We work and we recognize ourselves as a free media, kind of, as in Mexico, you may know there are a lot of people that works for specific newspapers or agencies, but we work from the community. Our work is more based in social problems and also on things that need to do with politics and art, of course. We are showing here 8 of us, but we really are around 20 members of the collective. And it's a huge diversity of the people that works with the collective.
Can you give us a couple of examples of some positive outcomes from people seeing these photographs? Because taking pictures and showing them is terrific, but is there anything concrete you could point to that has come about because of these photographs?
Yeah, from my point of view is that a lot of people like the idea of doing photography with many people. The practice of photography as a collective is it's not new, but is in Mexico a way to do it, we believe, because as you may know, the process of doing a news or being a photojournalist in Mexico is every day more dangerous. So working as a collective, it gives you a more safeness and also give you different views that you can work on a theme and work differently, Actually, most of the members of the collective, we are, I recognize myself as a documentary photographer, but some of my friends, they do other things besides photography. They use photography with the people, but we have like paramedics, nurses, and writers. So there is a huge diversity in the collective, and that's the richness of the collective.
How did you guys get to Photoville?
Well, so we created this platform called Batsy Lab. We recognize that photographers have a challenge in terms of how to get their work out, and that more resources were needed in order to help them organize portfolios, help them print, help them prepare their work, and have it not only be present in Facebook or in Instagram, but be physically present as photographs. So Isaac and I started this platform 2 years ago, Batsy Lab, and set up both a printing lab, a digital printing lab, and a darkroom, analog printing, so to speak, and have organized a set of exhibits and prepared photo books. So we basically work with the photographers to help put their work out in print form.
Is it fair to say, I think you did answer it earlier, but in general, that the fundamental point of the collective and of Consecuencias is to get the image of Chiapas out, but from the point of view of people from Chiapas?
Yes, that's a good...
as opposed to all the images we've seen over the past 25 years of the poverty and the strife and the war that's going on there.
Yeah, I think that's really important. Even though the participants are not born in Chiapas, but they've been living in Chiapas, since many years. So they are attached to the context. So what we believe is that it's really important to show the work from photographers that live in Chiapas, that live the reality that we live there, I think that we kind of...
Is there a good amount of indigenous photographers as well?
Yeah. Actually, in our collective, there are some of them members that are indigenous.
Most of these photographs digital or analog? Because I would imagine film and developing, and that's kind of exotic where you're working.
Well, yes, it is, but I would say, all of the photographs of Jose Angel are analog. They're film photographs developed by Jose Angel and Isaac and printed in the darkroom. And these are all silver gelatin prints. So 1/3 of what is here is completely analog, film photography and printed in silver gelatin. The rest is digital.
Can we speak? Yes, Vanessa Crowley is here also. Can you speak to your role in this project, please?
Sure. I just recently got on board with Pablo and Isaac. And basically, since they're mostly based in Chiapas, they wanted some feet on the ground in New York. And I did my master's thesis in Chiapas about 5 years ago and studied anthropology and human rights, and I've just been really interested in how many different layers there are to tell of the story of Chiapas through every single generation, and there's just been a lot of polarized views and a lot of, as Pablo was saying, a reclaiming of the indigenous narrative there, and sort of celebrating, but also trying to adapt that narrative into the way Mexico is evolving as a nation.
Were you familiar with their work when you were there working on your degree?
I was familiar with Tragameluz. I know a bunch of people there.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how's it been? How's Photoville been?
Pretty interesting. We didn't know how to expect with the result of the people looking at the pictures, because the pictures are not pretty, are more document. Some of them are really strong in the sense of what they represent. So we were,
we stand corrected. Many of them are very strong. I'm looking around, you're not some, many.
Yeah. So we didn't know how to expect, how the people will be
receive it.
Yeah. But so far it's so interesting that we are having connections with people that are interested in Chiapas, and some of them they just remember places or even though photographers that are in this exhibition. So it has been really amazing,
Yeah, good.
I guess I'd just say that Chiapas is a place that if you've been there, it really takes a hold of you. And so the people that, have come by, that have had any sort of contact with the region, are just so excited to see the stories here in New York.
We believe in the power of the image as an element that has been shaping our reality in the sense of a memory. I have learned from Jose Angel to print, and from his photos, from his history. So that's the image that connected us, and we are connected now with this project, and we trying to connect more people with pictures, with photographs, with history.
Yeah, Photoville is a great opportunity for us, working in Chiapas, to connect to the larger world of photography. That's why we came, that's why we organized this exhibit, because we know here in New York there's such a strength of organizations and work in photography, and we think that it's worth for people to know about what's happening down in the south of Mexico, not just in Mexico City, but also for folks down there to connect to the organizations and the activity of photography in New York.
Understood. That's a good job here. Thank you. Thank you very much.
We hope you're enjoying this edition of the B&H Photography Podcast. Send us a tweet at BH Photo Video, #BH Photo Podcast.
Okay, we're speaking with Ron Haviv and Lauren Walsh of the 7 Project, and the pictures here are pretty startling. Who'd like to tell us about them?
I'll give you a little overview of the film, and then Ron can give you some background. So it's a film about 2 photographs. One was taken in Panama in 1989. The other one was taken in Bosnia in 1992. And they are both photographs by Ron. One depicts, a Panama photograph depicts an elected vice president being beaten by a paramilitary thug of the then dictator Noriega. And the other photograph from Bosnia depicts 3 Serbian paramilitary soldiers standing over the bodies of 3 civilians who've just been executed. So both photographs are the most iconic in the part of the world where they were taken, so that's Latin America and the Balkans. And we became really interested in understanding what happens to a photograph after it leaves the camera, and especially what happens to a photograph that is the most iconic in its part of the world. What kind of life does it lead? What kind of impact does it have? And it turns out that they have enormous impact in many spheres of society. So they start as journalism, and then they move into art, they move into propaganda, they move into education, they move into kind of commercialized kitsch as well.
They take on a life of their own.
Absolutely, right? They lead lives. Own. Yeah. So let me let Ron tell you some background about the moments when he took those photographs and then follow up.
We're standing here in the container of the Seven Foundation, which has multiple projects, one of which is supporting Biography of a Photo, this documentary about these two photographs. And basically, the photograph from Panama sort of launched my career. It was my first foreign assignment. It was my first experience in conflict. And this photograph wound up on the cover of Time Magazine, Newsweek, and U.S. News all in the same week, and immediately had some impact. But it was not really until the United States invaded Panama 7 months later where the real impact was seen, when the President of the United States spoke about the photograph as one of the reasons for the invasion that took place, which, as far as we know, is probably one of the few times where a photograph was referenced in a military action by the United States. And what was really interesting as we were doing this film, we interviewed the current president of Panama, and he said to us that this photo has an impact that gave Panamanians back its democracy, which is like an incredible thing to say about a photograph. And then on the photograph from Bosnia, this was the first real photographic evidence of what later became known as ethnic cleansing in the civil war in Bosnia. And very quickly, this photograph became a symbol for the Bosnians. They used it as a recruiting tool for people to come and fight on their behalf. And eventually, when the International Criminal Tribunal was used to indict war criminals, this photograph has been used in multiple trials to indict and convict war criminals. And so today, now 26 years after the photograph was taken, the daughter of one of the women that's lying dead in the photograph is using this photograph as the sole piece of evidence to indict the three men in the photograph. And one of the men with his foot back, with a cigarette and sunglasses, is actually a famous techno DJ in Belgrade. So they're really trying very hard to get him indicted.
Wow. And what about the other two?
The other two are said to be policemen. So everybody's alive, everybody's still there, and she feels, even though this photograph has convicted the politicians and the commanders, the actual foot soldiers, no one has been indicted yet. So the daughter wants there to be justice for her lost family.
I got to ask you one question. You said that this photograph, the one taken in Panama, was your first combat experience, or
It's my first foreign trip, my first trip involving tear gas and bullets and so on. Yeah.
When you hit the shutter, did you understand what you had captured there and what was going through your mind? Because I personally don't know how I would be reacting to that.
Well, this is the elected vice president. The election results had been nullified the day before. He and the other victors came out onto the streets to start an uprising. So I had an understanding a little bit of what was going on, but in the chaos and what was going on, and actually when he was eventually dragged out of the car, he's covered in blood. Some of the blood is his, but most of the blood is from his bodyguard who was killed trying to protect him. I didn't even recognize who he was, so I was just sort of following the moment. So I didn't really understand what was going on. And in the beginning, for me, it was very exciting. As a career, I got the cover of the magazines. Nobody knew who I was. But really, when the United States president spoke about the picture, I started to understand the role of photography and the fact that we can play a part in conversation, play a part in giving information for people to make decisions. It wasn't whether or not I agreed with the invasion. It was that understanding that my photograph played a role in that process, which I found incredibly fascinating.
Can I ask you, these photos have a life, but they have a life inside you too, right? For these years. What, over the years, have you thought of these photos, and how often do you go back to them, either you made a movie about them, but like physically and to look at them, or even mentally to think about these photos? And how big a part of your own photo career do you think of them professionally, but also internally in the weight of photography and the role that photos play?
Well, professionally, I'm tied and connected to these photographs. And the photographs have, since they've been taken, are published, I would say, at least every month, if not more, since they've been published in various ways. The photograph in Panama has been adopted by the country where my credit doesn't even appear. It just says archive, and it's published freely, and similar to the photograph in Bosnia. So I'm proud of that connection, but the personal was very much in that the first photograph taken in 1989, when I saw the impact that it had, not being completely naive, but a little bit more believing that photography can help and can play a role. 3 years later, when the other photograph was taken, and the same administration in the U.S. was in power, and this photograph, I felt, was visual evidence of what was going to happen if the world didn't intervene, and the photograph was completely ignored. And then I started to understand that sometimes a photograph can't do anything, but it has these other lives. It has this other ability to have impact, which is what we explore in the film. So there's both kind of personal hope for photography in this work, but also reality, and also the understanding that it's up to people like myself and Seven and other people to continue to remind people about what the power of photography can be. And so in Biography of a Photo, while it is about my photographs, the film really does talk about this amazing power of photography and what can happen with images.
Have you ever been frustrated with how it's been construed or how it's been used by the powers that be? You know, one of your photos?
When Russia invaded Ukraine a few years ago, a very powerful Russian blogger took this photograph, changed the caption, said that the aggressors were Ukrainian and the victims were Russians. And the photograph went viral all over Russia. Millions of people.
Fake news.
It was complete fake news. And I was like, oh my God, I put out a statement, but I had no reach to this audience. And it was quite amazing, you know, the way that photography can play a role today.
And all these years later, and you've shot many conflict zones since then, do you still feel the strength of what you can do? Do you still feel a positive impact? I don't want to say positive impact, but do you still feel what you're doing is worthwhile?
Absolutely. I think there's, without question, still power in the photographers that are working today, whether myself or others working in Syria, Iraq, or so on, because even though in our world of oversaturation of images, the really powerful images, important images, eventually wind up to the top. And most importantly, even if they're ignored in terms of kind of having impact immediately, photographs stand as evidence, they stand as a record, and they stand to hold us all accountable for our actions and our inactions. And I think they're always going to be very, very important to the documentation of human history.
So you think the truth prevails eventually?
Eventually it will come out, eventually it will have impact. A lot of the work that you see here in the container has been incorporated in curriculum, in high schools and other places, so visual elements are very, very important.
Well, tell me about the movie and when we can find it, where we can find it, and if it'll be released in theaters.
Yeah, the film is in progress. It'll be out next year, 2019, and you can watch the trailer on biographyofaphoto.com.
Great. Thanks, guys.
Thank
you very much. Appreciate it.
We are at the container of the Authority Collective, and we are speaking with...
My name is Mary Kang. I'm part of the Authority Collective board member.
And my name is Elaine Cromie, also a board member of the Authority Collective.
My name's Arlene Mejorado, and I'm part of the Lit List 30.
So Authority Collective is a group of women, femmes, trans, non-binary, and gender non-conforming people of color reclaiming their authority in photography, film, and VR, AR industries. Our mission is to empower marginalized artists with resources and community and to take action against systemic and individual abuses in the world of lens-based editorial, documentary, and commercial visual work.
So you got together about a year ago in Los Angeles, and from there, you've created this group, all right? And where'd you go from there? What happened between that meeting and us meeting here in the container in Brooklyn?
So one of the original founding board members, their name is Oriana Corin, and this was their idea. The Lit List was part of their idea. So on that journey from when the group was first founded till now, Oriana had put out a call for underrepresented, marginalized photographers, and that's how we have the Lit List. And so it's a show of 30 photographers, and that was probably one of the biggest actions or biggest works of stuff from the Authority Collective, or one of our larger
projects.
Yeah, it was a goal of ours this year. So since it's been our first year, we've really set just a couple things in mind to try to get going and to be sustainable after the first year. And so the Lit List is one of them. We had a talk at MOPLA in LA, the Month of Photography in LA, at the beginning of the year. And I think we're just trying to build community as our one of our biggest things that we're trying to do between first forming and now.
The show seems to be sort of stylistically pretty diverse.
Yeah, so I think Arlene can probably speak more about her reasoning behind what photos that she chose?
Yes. So being a part of the Lit List 30, it was interesting because it did bring together photographers that are stylistically very different, that are pursuing different areas of the field. So there are some that are more editorial, photojournalists. I myself am a photojournalist, so I appreciated that there was like this space where, a collective exists that is kind of like a cheerleader or like a hype man, like something that we maybe didn't know we needed to back us up or to be behind us as we're like trying to, make it in the industry, and also as we're like trying to build the, I guess, confidence to tell our stories also in a culture that maybe doesn't let us be centered, or often we're like more on the periphery or on the sidelines. So something like Authority Collective really helps to bring that language, to just like center ourselves and create stories, and also have an avenue for having our work actually seen. And I think for me, like if Authority Collective hadn't existed, I don't know if I would have been a part of Photoville, being from Los Angeles, and just so like it's nice to have this access to like the New York photo community, which I know respects photography very much, and to be able to meet all of these photographers from all over the world, and also be able to connect and find a little bit of that like comfort in like identifying with each other and saying, oh yeah, I'm going through the same kinds of struggles, I'm not the only one, and like it breaks up that isolation that we can experience as photographers, women of color. And so yeah.
Can I ask, have you had your photo shown at all prior to this, or is it the first experience?
I have had my photography shown. I've had a solo exhibit. I've shown at the Charlie James Gallery in LA, galleries in Texas, but this is my first time showing my work in New York, and that's a big deal because I've always looked to New York for a lot of my photo references, and a lot of my favorite photographers are from New York. And so I think also being new to the industry, like now that I've been coming to New York more and like going to places like the Open Society, or like, learning more about Magnum photographers, or the International Center of Photography, like I'm really starting to understand how our work can reach a level of respect that it, I think, deserves, that we, that we can have access to these really great spaces. And so Photoville has been a nice bridge for that so far.
Can anybody here point to anything concrete that has come to fruition since you've come together and started doing this body of work?
For me, I feel like I've been getting contacted with more assignments. So it's letting me work, and it's bringing income, and it's bringing opportunities. So maybe it's not directly correlated, but I did notice that when the Lit List was published, that right away I started getting more emails from different media platforms and news sources that have asked me to do assignments. And like you were saying, it's not just people, it's not necessarily people that look like me, but in general, just having the opportunity to tell all kinds of stories, because I don't only want to photograph people that look like me or tell stories that are of mine, because I think that's pointless. Like I want to be try to find a way to be a mirror for the world, and be a storyteller, a visual storyteller. So like you were saying, all the work here is technically sound. It's very talented photographers.
Not just technically, but creatively sound too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely creatively sound. And but it's exciting. It's like, these new voices and emerging storytellers, and I think the work in here is very dynamic and vivid. And
cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you guys so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you for listening.
We're with Krista, and the show here is probably one of the more interesting ones. It's called Internal Ballistics. Could you explain what we're looking at here? Because this is different.
Sure. It's 3 different artists looking at the object and impact of bullets. Instead of talking about guns, which is so commonly done, I'm talking about what comes out of the gun instead, sort of flipping the idea on its head to talk about gun control.
Okay. What was the seed of this? There was an interesting cup of coffee that this was hatched over, I'm assuming.
In 2014, there was a mass shooting that got me started thinking about how I could talk about what happens emotionally and physically when a shooting happens. Instead of talking about the guns, which we get immune to, how do we talk about the impact of what happens through that? And this is what came up with that. Deborah Bay's work, I have 3 artists here in the container. Deborah Bay, who's one of my represented artists, had created the series called Big Bang, and those are bullets that are being fired into bulletproof plexiglass. So we started with that. We added Sabine Perlman's cross-sections of bullets so that we could see the actual objectness of the bullet. And then Garrett Hansen created shooting targets, replicas of shooting targets, etched into mirrors. So not only could we look at ourselves, but we could see where we would lose our lives if we were shot at, because the holes in the targets are our heart and our head.
And I think it's important to note that there is zero bloodshed or gore in this. Exactly. It's metaphorical. In some ways, it's beautiful. In many ways, it's beautiful.
And disturbing all at the same time. It allows you an entryway to be able to think about what exactly happens at the end of that bullet.
Do you think most people get that? When people walk in here, do you see horror or do you see awe in their face?
I see a little bit of everything. There are people that really understand it, really get it, and are really impacted by it. There are people that are more curious about it. There are people that try to talk their way out of it. There are more people that question my decision whether I am a pro-Second Amendment or anti-Second Amendment person.
I could see that confusion.
Yeah, I could see that. So it becomes an interesting conversation, and that's all really I'm asking for.
It's a dialogue. Okay, you're creating a dialogue.
Exactly.
Because it's certainly inviting when you walk by here. It's very inviting. It's decorative. There's almost a celebration. And even the bullets are works of art, especially when you line them all up, the different projectiles, the shapes and everything. It's a science, it's an art, it's architecture almost. Mm-hmm. But then you realize what it is.
Right. We actually have Deborah Bay here, who's happy to talk about her work as well.
And you did the plexiglass or the...
Right, the bullets that were captured in the plexiglass and bulletproof plexiglass.
Okay.
What was the seed of that for you? What made you think about that? What brought this project to fruition?
Actually just buying plexiglass, like to do some framing, and they had a little display with some bulletproof, just to demonstrate how effective bulletproof plexiglass could be. And so there were like 3 or 4 different kinds of bullets that had been shot into the plastic and then captured there. And so there were all these interesting trajectory lines, and you could see the shattered pieces of plastic that were captured within the panel. And I thought, well, that's just visually so interesting. And then, once you think of what it actually is and see the damage that it can wreak, when you imagine something like that hitting muscle and bone versus, being in the middle of a sheet of hard plexiglass, it was really very compelling.
Yeah. So did you actually commission, or did you actually take pieces of this plexi and fire different caliber shells into it? Or did you just happen to have access to people who've been shooting plexi?
That was actually, took a while to figure out logistically how I was going to do that. And it worked out really well, because I ended up calling the police academy at one of the local community colleges in Houston, and the head of the operation there said, well, come on out and we'll talk about it. And so they had access to a lot of different kinds of guns and ammunition that, probably regular people wouldn't have, because some of them are actually, assault bullets and things like that. So it was really an interesting experience.
You don't want to mess around with bullets and plexiglass like this, because it could come back at you.
Definitely, yeah.
That's what I was curious about. Okay.
No, whenever I give talks, I do tell them, don't try this at home.
Can I ask a question? Wallspace is based out of California, correct? Can you explain how the process worked to come to Photoville? Did you apply? And how did that process work, briefly?
Well, I have been a fan of Photoville for years now, and I'd wanted to find a way to come and showcase work. Earlier this year with the Parkland shooting, we wanted to bring up this topic again, since we had shown this now 4 years ago. So the submission period for Photoville was open, so I submitted the project to Photoville and went through their review process, chatted with them on the phone, and then they sent me a note saying that I'd been accepted to Photoville, to the village.
Cool. So you get a sense of damage with the plexiglass types. But in terms of the innards of the bullets, is it more showing like the potential damage, or what were you trying to get at there?
One of the big questions that comes up always when people look at the actual cross sections are they real? Right. Because the concept of a bullet is just powder and a projectile. There's no knowledge of the fact that so many bullets can be designed so many different ways to do so many different things to maim and kill in different ways. So this is more an objectness to show and display just how much science and effort and control we try to take in generating that one object of killing.
Thanks a lot.
Mm-hmm. My pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much.
Thanks to all of the photographers and organizers we spoke to, and to the folks that continue to put together this wonderful photography festival. For John, Jason, and myself, thank you so much for tuning in today.